So I think what we're going to do is I'm going to leave you guys unmuted, and we're just going to run the whole thing, and we're going to pause for questions when we do polling, and that's the plan. Does that sound okay?
Sounds good, because we can continue to mute ourselves, correct?
Oh yeah, you totally can.
Sure.
So once you don't want people to hear you, feel free.
Got it.
All right.
On the road? Yeah. Okay, I'll go launch this. I'll do my we're launched. I'll do my little intro from back there, and we'll go.
All right, cool. Sounds good.
All right, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the webinar. We are going to get going in just a moment here. We always do like to just briefly remind you how these webinars function. Audio is one way only from us to you, which means to communicate with us, you'll utilize the Q&A feature in Zoom webinars here, and you'll likely find that Q&A button on the bottom middle, top left, top left or lower left sometimes. It depends on your screen configuration. Nonetheless, that Q&A box is how you'll communicate with us throughout the course of this webinar. And I do wish to draw your attention to that now and ask for your assistance just to confirm that our signal is reaching you and that it is a good, clear signal. If you could just type Y or yes if that is true, that lets us know things are working well. First page of the PowerPoint presentation being used today should also be viewable on your screen. If you don't see that, experience audio problems or any other technical problems, please, again, utilize that Q&A box and let us know. If anything comes up, we'll attempt to take care of that in the background without interrupting the webinar. So it looks like we're good to go. I'm going to step aside, and it looks like Kefi is getting ready to start us off here. We'll get going in just a moment.
Thank you for joining us for the December GATE Equity webinar, where we explore topics related to equity and graduation success. This webinar will be recorded, and we're working on our process for making our webinars ADA compliant. So stay tuned for those awesome recordings. They are coming. The PowerPoint is posted on OSPI on the GATE Equity webinar page if you want to follow along, and I've pasted that link into the chat. Also, we'd like to ask that you direct questions you want us to answer in the Q&A, not the chat, so that we can more easily monitor and respond to you. Chat's more for your own commentary, so if you want to talk amongst yourselves, that's a really good place to do that. I'm Kefi Anderson, OSPI Graduation Equity Program Supervisor, and today's topic is early warning systems. We're really thrilled that we could get some experts in this field to share their work today. The Everyone Graduate Center is here to talk about their research on early warning systems and how you can use it. We're so glad they could be here to share with us. Superintendent Reichdahl's K-12 vision has 3 phases, each lasting 2 years, from small improvements to a full redesign of the K-12 system. And early warning systems are a critical part of school improvement because they use data to close opportunity gaps. We know from a 2014 analysis done by the Washington State Institute for Public Policy that each graduate creates benefits of more than $500,000 in higher earnings, as well as societal savings in areas such as healthcare and unemployment compared to students that don't graduate. Early warning systems are built on the ABCs, that's attendance, behavior, and coursework. And these are borne out in research as high leverage points that predict graduation success. Our goals for today are to get you familiar with early warning indicators and get some practical advice on some of the nuances of using them for student success from the Everyone Graduate Center. We'll also give you some resources to help you along the way. At OSPI, we're working on an integrated student supports protocol that will help with implementing a multi-tiered system of supports. A strong early warning system includes many of the same hallmarks of the MTSS system. So as you're listening today, keep in mind that early warning systems are an essential part of the larger ecosystem of an MTSS. They incorporate data, building capacity and infrastructure for implementation, partnerships, tiered supports, and team-driven shared leadership and problem solving. We're lucky to be joined by staff from the Everyone Graduate Center, and I want to give them as much time as possible to give you the benefit of the things that they've learned in their research. Can you each introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. I am Paul Verstraete. I am National Early Warning System Facilitator for the Everyone Graduate Center and Talent Development Secondary, as well as for the National Student Attendance, Engagement, and Success Center at the Department of Education. Unfortunately, we are unable to have Dr. Balfanz joining us here today, but I'll leave it to my other 2 colleagues to introduce themselves.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Felicia Walker, and Paul and I work closely together. We both are on the National Early Warning Systems team for Johns Hopkins University under Everyone Graduate Center and Talent Development. And I, too, work with the National Student Attendance, Engagement, and Success Center that's operated by the Department of Education. And we both have implemented early warning systems throughout different grade levels, from the East Coast to the West Coast. So we have quite a bit of experience, and we're always open to share that with others.
And hi, everyone. My name is Natalie Williams. I am also a staff member of Talent Development Secondary that is working here in Seattle. My title is a school transformation facilitator, so I am helping to implement all of the work that we are doing around early warning indicators on a day-to-day basis in Hopkins School in Seattle.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point, a good time at this point to say the Talent Development Secondary and Everyone Graduate Center are sister organizations within Johns Hopkins University. So you'll hear us talking quite a lot about Talent Development Secondary as a lot of the implementation and field work that we're doing, and then talking about the Everyone Graduate Center as the research and the best practices behind all of that field work. So if you hear either one, we tend to work for both within the university, so I didn't want people to get confused as we were talking. You'll hear us talking about both. So we could go on to the next slide. I'm going to get us kicked off today. When we talk about early warning systems, why do we need them is because early warning systems are all about having students build that momentum through their academic careers, that momentum to not just get to that stage at the end of their 12th grade year to receive that piece of paper, but to get the momentum to then move beyond it into their post-secondary college and career success. And so the reason that we are so focused on this is that without that piece of paper and without that momentum, there is little to no work out there that does not require a high school degree. And specifically the salaries and wages are for people who are able to get that type of work usually aren't enough to be supporting the family, and that leaves entire communities being cut off from this great American dream that we have here. Next. And so in the end, our biggest goal when it comes to supporting students is that regardless of anything that happens beyond the doors of our schools, early warning systems, we are trying to make sure that they do graduate, that they are prepared for that post-secondary life and for post-secondary schooling and training. And so the goal is that we support whatever needs that they have and whatever needs that, whatever obstacles that they have that we can help overcome. So I'm going to start out by giving a very brief description of what an early warning system is as part of the National Center and Everyone Graduates in Talent. So if we can go on to the next. With a focus on data, EWS is designed to identify those students who are at risk, who are signaling through that data that they are disengaging and maybe heading away from that stage and crossing that stage with that piece of paper towards leaving school altogether. The data shows that that when they are leaving that stage, we may not know exactly why they're leaving with the data, but we know that they're going to walk into school one day, walk out, and never come back. So next, I believe the slide actually does a little animation of that walking away. So this is the graph that started it all for us. The graph that Dr. Balfanz, that original groundbreaking research from a decade ago. This graph represents the attendance, behavior, English, and math, the ABCs, attendance, behavior, and course performance. And this is Philadelphia, more than a decade ago, or more than 2 decades ago, following the track of all of these 6th graders within the entire city of Philadelphia who had one of these problems and seeing where they ended up. And so as we can see every year, less and less of these kids are where they should be, moving from 6th to 7th grade. If they had any of these problems, there are fewer of them that remained with their cohort, moving on from grade level to grade level. And between 9th and 10th grade, there's a huge drop. These students are not in the grade that that their age would suggest. And so this graph just shows that year after year, just looking at that 6th grade data, students falling off track. Moving on to the next. And that data is pretty much representative of engagement. The idea that a student is engaged in the learning, engaged in class, because attendance, behavior, and course performance is all about students being engaged. If you are not showing up, then you're not there to be engaged. If you don't understand the social behaviors necessary to be successful, then you're not able to engage. And if you're not doing the work, then you're actually doing that, not engaging by turning in the work and getting that done, which is why attendance, behavior, and grades are the perfect indicators for engagement, because without them, they are the basics of it. And the ACT test did a study of over 14,000 students at the post-secondary level to see whether or not, and they used engaged as an indicator of success. And the results show that engaged is a valid predictor of academic performance and persistence. It provides additional information that more accurately identifies students who are at risk. So the ACT test, that engaged test that they give at, I believe it's in 8th or 9th grade that they give this test, that motivation and self-engagement and self-regulation, these behaviors that we are taught through school, without them, we are not able to be successful. Which then moves on to the next one. All of this data leads to that motivation I was talking about, that momentum. next slide. That if we're talking about two outcomes, if we're talking about a student that is on their way towards graduation day, the data shown in that middle column are students who are getting stuck in the mud on the way. It's slowing them down. It's keeping them from even being able to make it to that graduation day. So their momentum is hampered. And then if the reverse of that, if you can get them from not only having not having poor attendance, but having great attendance, missing fewer than 5 days in a year, or having those self-management, regulation, and advocacy skills, and then having great course performance at B average or above, not only are you not stuck in the mud, but you are building that momentum to go past that graduation day and into that post-secondary success. And so that's why these ABCs are so important, is because not only do they show those kids who are getting more and more stuck, but they are showing those kids who that momentum has been building, and you can know that they'll be able to make it past that graduation day. Moving on to the next slide. Again, we are also big believers in those tiered interventions as a different way of looking at that. When it comes to those tier 1 interventions, in a lot of ways we think about that as project management, that we are doing these initiatives, these whole school initiatives, to create these safe and welcoming environments. And so being a champion of these interventions is a lot like project management, making sure everything is in the right place, in the right order, and the initiatives are going well. And if you go on next, the next animation, the reverse of that, going up to the pinnacle of the pyramid, we're talking about case management, where we're talking about identifying individual students themselves and making sure that they are on that path to graduation. And then the moving on to the next animation, where we create this Venn diagram to kind of show when we're talking about tier 2 interventions, it's a mix of both in a lot of ways. That we're doing project management for case management in the kind of way where we're targeting supports, where we're grouping students that need a specific kind of support, which is the project management side, but then we're working with this small group that needs this support, which is kind of the case management side. So in a lot of ways, tier 2 interventions are a mix of the two. And then finally, moving on to the next slide, EWS is not a lone activity. It's one in which teachers band together with counselors and administrators to solve the issues and to support the students that they all share. There's nothing more powerful than me as the social studies teacher working with the English teacher, the math teacher, and the science teacher to support a student that we all see every day, and to be able to make sure that their needs are being met. So this idea of a team, an EWS team, is vital. And then moving on to the next slide, we have our basic formula of adding the ABCs to the tiered interventions to the teacher teams, and we get ourselves an early warning system. These are the core components of what an early warning system needs to be. Which then gets us to the next slide, that once you have these things, in order to function well and at the scale needed for this multi-tiered student support system, you have to have regular access to that early warning data. It needs to be reliable and timely. There needs to be this set time where adults can review that data. Pulling together teachers to be able to review that data on their own, the best way to do that is there needs to be a time and a space for this to happen. And without that time and space, it's a lot like herding cats. And then finally, that organized response system needs to act upon that early warning data in both a systemic and tailored manner, which means we need to be able to create those larger cultural changing systems that are adapted to the culture of the individual schools. So every early warning system I've ever worked in, like Felicia and I were talking about working in New Mexico versus out on the East Coast versus I'm working with the Puget Sound Education Service District. Every early warning system I've ever seen is a little bit different. And so our systems need to be able to be tailored. So that's my overarching introduction to early warning systems. And I want to then turn it over to my colleague, Felicia Walker, to talk more about that context of early warning systems.
Well, thank you, Paul, for that awesome introduction about early warning systems. And as you talked about the research and the purpose and the multi-tiered student supports in our formula for EWS, I just want to spend a little time and give everyone an overview of what the context of early warning systems is. What are things that we would want to or encourage you to have in place or working towards getting in place to implement an effective early warning systems? Next. So as Paul alluded to, the focus when we talk about early warning systems is we're working to increase on-track and recovery rates while also paying attention to those that are already on track and retaining those students on track so they don't fall off track. And then we also know that if we keep those students on track and we increase the recovery rates of those falling off track, that will in turn increase the promotion rates and the graduation rates for our students in our schools, which is going to end up in success for us as well as the students. Next. So when we talk about the context for the call today of early warning systems, what we want to look at is the data. Everyone has data, probably too much, but what we want to look at is what is the data saying? What should you be focused on? As Paul talked about earlier, early warning systems composes of attendance, behavior, and course performance. So let's say your students come to school. So attendance is not your issue. Does your data focus say that you should be honing in on behavior? Could that be a tier 1 or a whole school initiative? And then you want to look at what's in place. What are we already doing that correlates with the components in the context of early warning systems that we just may need to tweak a little bit or modify so that we can increase the chances of students becoming on track and attending school as well. And then we want to spend a little time on interventions and resources. What's available? What do you have to answer what the data is saying? And how might you go about doing that based on how many students we're talking about that have the different early warning systems indicator issues? And then lastly, we're going to look at the organizational structures of what we have informed schools about putting in place when it comes to early warning systems. Next. So starting with data, how do we organize the data into useful information? Is the data easily readable by teachers if they only have an hour of time to discuss it? Is it highlighted with colors so that teachers can quickly identify what students need to be discussed? Where do you gather the data? What ABC resources or sources do you have where the data lies? Is it with one person? Is it with teams? And how are you monitoring the data once you have it? So you have data now, what are you going to do about it? Or how do you respond to it? So what we like about early warning systems is it adds action to the information. So what you see on the slide here is an example of a very user-friendly, regardless of your level of data interpretation, you see before you an example of how we would suggest starting out with looking at data. You see that the colors really pop out. So I'm looking at my reds and I know that, wow, I may need to spend some time with those students or talking about those students in those areas. And then it also tells me who's doing well and in what areas. So the two columns that you see under each course, under each indicator, signify a current space and then the actual previous information, because we find that to be very helpful when we're trying to talk about students. So the important part of this is with all the data that we're collecting, we need to be able to turn it into information. And it's usually most helpful when it's in one single document where you're not flipping from screen to screen or paper to paper to find out what's a student's behavior versus their attendance. So we found that to be very helpful and useful when teachers are trying to discuss students. So this formatted data that you see here quickly allows you to identify, or it highlights, the areas of success as well as the areas that are challenged. It tells us who needs extra support and also by how much, depending on the previous data that's being displayed here as well. And finally, we heard a little bit about data being predictable. We can look into the future and see the more or less likely possibilities that are out there for our kids if we start to focus on their indicators early. And that could be starting in first quarter and looking at data, or it could be starting looking at data from the first few weeks of school. So that will vary depending on how accessible data is and how often it's available. Next slide. So the second component comes to play where when you know what the data is saying, what resources do you have in place to address attendance, behavior, and course performance? And in what tiers what do those resources lie? When we get to helping and assisting schools with their resources and taking a look at their resources, a lot of times we discover that they're heavy in one of the indicators versus the others. And sometimes the data is saying that they need to reverse that. Where they don't have a lot of resources, they may need to look into what other resources might we add to that area. So for example, if a school's data is saying that they need to look at their course performance, let's say in the English department, and a lot of their resources are focused on attendance. Well, the students are coming to school, but they're still having other challenges. So knowing collectively what resources you have for each indicator, and also looking at the tiers that resource is supporting really will help the situation when teachers sit down to meet and discuss how to address the multi-tiered support for students. For tier 1, we're talking about whole school. What does that whole school support look like for attendance, behavior, and course performance? And in tier 2, those targeted groups that Paul talked about earlier. What type of supports do you have for a group of students that are exhibiting a common behavior? And lastly, and we're going to spend a little bit of time in a couple of slides talking about what do we suggest for that individualized support for students, and how do we go about discussing that individual student that has common teachers? Next. So one resource that we share is looking at your interventions and creating what we call a resource map. So how cool would it be for everyone in the building, every teacher, every staff member, everyone that walks into the school is aware and able to grab a sheet of paper or a couple of sheets of paper and know exactly what resources you have for students in the different targeted areas. So whether it's tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3. We always encourage schools to develop what we call a resource map, because everything, again, just like the data we looked at earlier, it's all in one place. And what you would need to do is look at what is your need for academic or attendance or behavior interventions. And then what do you realistically have the capacity to handle? And later on, we'll talk about what is the effectiveness or impact of the resources that you have. We want to always look to make sure that what we're putting in place is actually making a difference. So how likely is it that there's a lot of resources available in your building or even in your community that you aren't aware of because you maybe or not haven't had that student that had that issue, but maybe one day you will. So it's very important that we encourage schools to create resource maps so that everyone is on the same page when it comes to what's available and what resources you have. And then one thing we like to tell you to look at is when you have resources, what's working and what's not working, what's making an impact, what are some things that we may want to modify and change because we don't see a difference as we assign those interventions to students. And also, how are they being monitored? How will we go about looking to see or discovering whether or not those resources are effective? So developing a resource map becomes the first step of looking at and answering all of those questions. Next. And here's an example of a sample resource map that was created at one of the schools that Paul and I assisted. And as you can see, some of these things you're already doing probably in your building. And some of the things may be like, oh yeah, we are doing that, and that is a resource. So when we do our training on resource mapping, a lot of times that's what happens. People start to have aha moments, and they start to be able to collect all of the information that they know about resources into that one space. And some teachers in the same building on the same teams are not even aware of what's available because they just never had to interact with a student that had that issue. So the value of the resource map, as simple as it may seem, is endless. It is a very, very valuable tool that we encourage all schools to develop. Next. So when we have the data, we have our resource maps ready. Now we want to talk about how do we go about meeting around students and around the indicators. Depending on the number of students you're addressing, it often can determine who should be at the table, who should be at the meetings, who should be on teams. And one way to look at this is if you're creating a focus list of students you're going to focus on, whether it's in one or all three of the indicators, you want to look at how many students am I talking about? How many students do we have the capacity to focus on? Maybe if it's even just for this semester, we focus on this group of students, and then next semester we move to another group. So if you're talking about 0 to 20 students, a lot of times it's the counselor, social worker, graduation coach, or maybe a content teacher, a grade level teacher representative. Any of those individuals usually are the persons who lead that effort. When you get into more students, 20 to 50 students, this is when we actually say, you know what, we may need a dedicated team of staff to actually meet around these students and form a support team to keep track of the students. And that can be done with the same individuals, and I'll give you a visual in a couple of slides, but the counselor, social worker, graduation coach, or grade level team leader, department head, or even a cohort of teachers could assist with talking about and discussing the needs of the 20 to 50 students. And when it gets to more than 50, we strongly encourage grade level or small learning community teacher teams. And that becomes critical because now we're talking about a bigger group of students, and it's very, it's more, I guess I should say, systematic when you're talking about students who share the same teachers and they have that grade level, or even sometimes schools do it with content time to discuss what's best for those students. Next. So when we look at Tier 3 and we talk about supporting individual students, one of our number one strategies for our early warning systems are early warning indicator meetings. So you're meeting about students and their ABC data. And this could be composed of a leadership team that does this, an EWS team, or a team of teachers. And so there's no doubt that there are meetings going on where teachers and staff are meeting about kids. Where we come into play with EWI meetings being effective is that not only are you meeting to coordinate and create interventions for students who have indicators and talking about how you monitor and their progress, but we provide a very structured and timely fashion that teachers grow to love because it gets them through so many kids, whereas when they used to have that same hour of discussing students, or 45 minutes or 30 minutes, they were not able to get through one or even 2 to 3 students. But when you talk about the structure and process for EWI meetings, we have a structured time to talk about the student, to assign the intervention, to assign the point person or the champion, and also the follow-up. So it becomes a really effective way to talk about students. Next. So here's a visual of the organizational structure that I mentioned earlier. So schedule and teams, that's always going to be sometimes the biggest hurdle is when can we get a team of teachers who have the same kids or share the same students around the table at one time. So creatively, we work with schools with their scheduling during the summertime and the beginning of the school year to try to put this in place where it is effective for teachers and staff to meet who share a collective group of students. So this is just an example of what that may look like. And as you see, you can have one person who is the facilitator of the conversation. And so for the sake of this slide, they're identified as the EWI facilitator, but that does not have to be the same person for each meeting. And then as mentioned earlier, you have your counselor there if possible. And if the student is a special education student, you may have a SPED teacher there. And then also the core teachers and also the elective teachers as well, if possible. Next. And what do we do to get success from this model is we use that time to connect students with adults and or any interventions that may be useful and helpful and that are available. And a lot of that is done by looking at the resource map. So during the meetings, you have a structured agenda with the time limits, as I said before, and it gives you the time to say which one of these interventions based on our resource map would be most effective for the indicator that's being displayed by that student. And just across the bottom are some of our most popular responses to some of those situations that have been very successful. And that is by implementing success mentors, whether that's a mentor from a different grade level or someone from the outside community coming into the school. Graduation coaches, when it comes to 12th graders, they can play a big role in identifying and following up with those seniors that we're trying to get to graduate. And then check-ins, the check-ins, check-in connects, just depending on what the issues are, that has been very powerful and successful in a lot of our schools. And then one of our tier 1 initiatives that we push are report card conferences, where the picture you see now is an example of that, where we actually have students sitting across from a nurturing and caring adult who has volunteered their time to come in and speak to students about their report cards, or even some schools like it so much they do it during progress report time. But it's a time for a student to kind of talk with someone who they don't see on a regular basis. And we've helped schools to structure this when the option of bringing someone outside is not available. So there's a lot of different ways that you can set up report card conferences. But this is a very effective tier 1 intervention or tool that you can use for schools. So I hope that that overview of the context of EWS was helpful. And I'm going to turn it over to Kefi, who is going to talk about polling questions.
Yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to launch this poll. Having listened to everything that has been shared this morning, do you think that you're using an early warning system? Yes, maybe, maybe not yet. Excuse me, I have a cold this morning. We also do have a couple of questions from our audience this morning. And if you have questions you want to ask, you can put those into the Q&A there. Annie was wondering, what about including the school nurse on the team to address health-related barriers to attendance? Is that something you guys would recommend also?
I'll take a stab at that. Yes, absolutely. We've learned over the years that the nurse is very critical in the discussions, because a lot of times where we see in schools notify the attendance, that they notify the attendance clerk that students are missing. Sometimes the nurse is overlooked, but she holds the key information to understanding why that student is absent. And we've also looked at the data that does say that students who are suffering with different health issues, a lot of times that's a a place that's overlooked. So to include a nurse in that would be awesome. We've suggested that before every meeting, when you're going to talk about students, you send the nurse a list of those students to be discussed, and she or he is able to offer any information related to that student. For instance, if they can't attend the meeting, at least they'll be able to let you know that there are some health related issues that could be impacting the student's attendance or even course performance or behavior. So yes, it is very good to include, when you can, the nurse in the conversations.
Mm-hmm. And we had another question. How do you support kids who are regular at school but have immense school gaps or education gaps? Do you have any recommendations?
I'm happy to take a stab at that one. The University of Chicago put out a great report about the two sides to every grade. The one side, when you get a grade in a class, the one side of it is the knowledge of and the understanding of the work itself, and then the other side is doing the work. And that to get a good grade or to get good course performance for that indicator, you need to be able to have both. And for me, that question is for students who have one, they're doing the work, they have the effort, they want to be able to get it done, but they don't have that knowledge, that understanding to be able to complete it. And so in that case, it's about tutoring, and it's about supporting the specific skills gap. If it were reversed, it's more of the mentoring, emotional and motivational support that Felicia was talking about. And so when it comes to those skill gaps that you're talking about doing catch up, you have a group of students who are motivated, they want to, but they've got these gaps. And so some of the strategies that we have seen in high schools is a twilight school, where there are classes being held after the end of the day, in which students who are far behind or need some sort of alternative setting are going to those classes afterwards. I have seen the online classes, and my only concern about those is the greatest success I've seen with those is that if they are taking part in some sort of online class to make up credits, that there is a space within the school where there is that motivational, that mentoring support for it as well, that there's a face to those classes. The greatest successes for that type of recovery I've seen are where they create that space in the building. Things like that. So we're talking about trying to work on that understanding side of the equation.
Mm-hmm. We have had a couple more questions. Can you share your meeting template for facilitating quick multi-student meetings? Do you guys have a template like that developed?
Yes, we have a process that I can share, I guess via email. I can send it to you, Kefi.
Yeah, I'll post it on our website and we'll make sure that people get it.
Yes.
Awesome. And we also had another question. Is it possible to customize the data pulled from the EWS to your district, or does that require an additional fee to have a customized early warning system?
Well, a lot of times, and Paul is the data guru, so I'll let him step in too, but a lot of times that depends on where your student information system is, who is the author of that. It's very important that you do when you're able, I should say, that you do have an input in how that looks, because in the field, you are the ones that are going to be looking at that data, and really you know what is the most important data that should be included and that you need to look at quickly to conduct effective meetings. So sometimes it is a fee. In the districts we work with in the past, sometimes it is an extra fee, and sometimes it's part of that package that you receive. Paul, I don't know if you have anything else to add.
Working with schools, my part of that is mostly the homegrown systems, we're going to make our own series of spreadsheets that pulls in the data. So that in and of itself requires a lot of customization. That study that we talked about, that was the groundbreaking one that started it, that Dr. Balfanz did more than a decade ago, has been replicated across the country, where the ABCs are predictive from, there are some studies going all the way down into kindergarten showing that they're predictive of future success, that they also, so they go grade level to grade level. They go, there have been studies in suburban, urban, and rural areas, studies in every region of the country. And so, so the ABCs themselves work everywhere, but every school and every district, the percentage that on the one side you're considered more likely to graduate, and on the other more likely not to, that shifts a little bit with every district and every school. And so working with schools to create their spreadsheets, it is a little bit about finding that line, which above this line you have more of a likelihood of graduating, and below this line you have more of a likelihood of not graduating. That's where you put your line, is that, so for some schools it's 10% attendance, and for others it's 10% absence, and for others it's only a 5% absence. That below that 5% absence rate, and you're more likely to drop out if you attend this school than if you were to attend a school in a district across state lines, that type of thing. So yeah, customizing that data to be able to draw that line is very important. And again, what Felicia said, depending on if you've bought a module from a student information system, then there may or may not be a fee for that module to change that line. But working with schools to create their own spreadsheets, as part of our process, we draw that line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also we do have another webinar this afternoon. We're going to have Sunnyside High School on here, and they have a really pretty advanced early warning system. So if you want some examples of spreadsheets, we're going to be doing that at 12:30 today. So if you want to check,
I love a good spreadsheet. I may join that one.
You should check it out. It's pretty amazing. And I think we're going to go on to the next part here. Although we do have other questions, we're going to hold them so that you guys can share what's going on at Coursework.
Hi, everyone. My name is Natalie Williams, and again, I am a staff of Talent Development Secondary that is working at a school in Seattle, Coursework Middle School. Now I'm just going to talk a little bit about how we actually implement early warning systems in our school. So I provided a couple points I wanted to highlight. First of all, I just provided some demographic information about our school, but I also wanted to share that our principal has been in our school for 10 years. And additionally, this is our 8th year of Talent Development Secondary Partnership. So why that's important is because I think that our having consistent leadership has to set the frame of implementing these systems is important. And while it's not necessary to have the amount of time that we've had for EWS, I think it's important to understand that we've had trial and error, and we've learned, we've been able to try different things and create sustainability over time. So just wanted to set the stage with that. Next slide, please.
Sorry.
So just wanted to give some context for some of the things that Paul and Felicia talked about. First, how we're using data to identify students who are off track. We start before students enter our building. So we're a middle school, and in the springtime when we receive information about who's assigned to our school, we also receive student data from our school district, and we immediately start looking at that to identify students who are chronically absent, students with suspensions, as well as students who aren't meeting standard on the ESPA in math and literacy, so that we already know who those students are, and we're targeting them for our summer program. We're making sure that we're connecting with those families for the home visits, which we do actually for all incoming 6th graders, but we make sure we connect with those students. We're already recruiting them for our mentorship program. So we start early. And then we do have a master data tracker like the one that Felicia showed, and which we can keep multi-year data on. So that is important for us because we are able to flag students at the end of the year and over the summer, so that when I'm helping some of our community partners set up their focus lists, or when we're counselors are setting up those small groups, or when we're designing our tiered interventions for the year, we already know who those students are, and we can prioritize the students that need that intervention first. And then we regularly update that master data tracker. It has every student on it, and it allows us to see which interventions are working and how we can tweak them so that we can be constantly improving. So that is very important. Also, in addition to ABC data, we include other data such as assessment data, surveys, and other data so that we can understand the whole child in addition to the ABCs. So a couple things there. Next slide. Just an overview. I'm going to go into a little bit of detail about our ABC interventions for each, for the tiered interventions. But on the left, you can see kind of a snapshot of our resource map. This is a less detailed version. We have a document that goes into a little bit more detail. But this is, we call this, instead of calling it a resource map, we call it our school climate campaign. And so this is something that anyone can access and shows an overview of how we are supporting across the ABCs. And this is especially an important tool when we do have community partners who come to us and wanting to partner, because they need to understand what our school-wide goals are, how where our gaps are, so that we can continue to fit them into where those gaps are and make sure they're aligned with our school-wide goals. Next slide. So here's a little bit about our attendance interventions. So first of all, our school goal is that all students miss less than 5 absences a semester. And we spend a lot of time making sure that everyone understands that's the goal. When we first started implementing, we spent a lot of time on attendance, and specifically around Tier 1 attendance initiatives. There's a picture there of our attendance window where there's support staff every single morning who intervene with students who are tardy or missing periods. So we really first focused on Tier 1, and then we built capacity in the Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions around attendance. And for us, that's where we started. Next slide. For behavior, like I said, we focused first a lot in our first couple of years on attendance, and then we moved a lot to behavior. So once we had students coming regularly, when we first began implementing EWS, we had average daily attendance in the low 80s, and now we had attendance in the middle 90s, which allowed us to see, okay, now students are here. What are the behaviors that we're seeing? And then we could focus again on a lot of the whole school and preventative things we're doing around behavior. So the having the currency to reinforce school-wide behavior expectations. We're in our second year of implementing restorative practices. And then in the last few years, we've been able to focus a little bit more on our mentor programs that support our school-wide behavior. And so there's 4 that we have currently. There's little icons for them in the corner there. We have a My Brother's Keeper and Sister's Keeper program, as well as an Hermanos and Hermanas Unidas program. And these are culture and gender specific mentorship groups that meet weekly and allow students to track actually all 3 of the ABCs. But these are really important points where students are getting both one-on-one mentorship as well as group mentorship. And this is again aligned to data. So when we give out a resiliency assessment, which we use through a vendor called Scholar-Centric, we get data from that allows us to see where we're seeing gaps. So for instance, last year we had a gap with peer-to-peer connections. We saw that a lot of students were not experiencing positive peer-to-peer connections. So in those mentorship groups, we can design certain workshops or bring in guest speakers to help us target that specific need. So Those mentor groups have been a really important tier 2 intervention, but we found success in starting with the tier 1 and then building capacity up through the tiers. Yes, and coursework. So for us, our school-wide goal is that all students receive a C or higher in all core classes. We started with targeting no course failures. So this was not always our goal. Once we have found success in preventing course failures, we then raised the bar and we said we want all students to receive a C or higher in all core classes. And we really emphasize in this, with coursework, students getting involved in this data tracking piece. You know, early warning systems, there's a lot of work that's on adults, but we think it's really important for students to be involved in this as much as adults. So one way that we do that is in the tier 1 section, every student in their advisory class gets access to tracking their own ABCs in monthly goal setting. So they get their own ABC data, they set their own goals, and they do their own progress monitoring. Again, in the Success Mentor groups, students are getting that same support with also a mentor connected to them on a weekly basis. So they get to track their own progress, and we reward them for meeting their goals. And that's been another really important place. And it's allowed us to see success. The students who are in our Success Mentor groups meet this goal of getting a C or higher in all core classes at a rate that's greater than the school as a whole. So, but having that school-wide goal as a frame is really important. The last thing that I wanted to share was a little bit on the next slide about how we use teacher teams. So just a couple of teacher teams I wanted to highlight for us. One, our grade level teams. So for our school, this is where we implement the early warning indicator meetings. They are attended by teachers, support staff, counselors, and an administrator. When we first began implementing EWS, these meetings were led by us, talent development. However, we now have been able to pass this back to grade level team leaders. So it's a teacher who's a team leader for each grade level that leads these meetings with the support of the counselor. And this is where they build, we call them student success plans, but it's that documentation of the interventions that is informed by the student data. So not just ABC data, but that survey and teacher data survey and assessment data that I talked about. In addition, we have an online platform for teachers to be documenting classroom observations and bring that classroom data also to those meetings. And we keep our plans actually in our district supported OneNote. So each student who has a student success plan has a page in OneNote that is kept throughout their time at our school, so we can actually revisit it, and that information and those notes about which interventions have been tried are kept and built on, which is something that's been really successful for us. Yeah, and the second thing I wanted to highlight for teacher teaming was professional learning communities. So our admin team puts together a calendar every year, which I put a little snapshot of about how our PLCs are going to come together collaboratively to improve teaching and learning. And together this year, we are reading a book to help deepen our practice around using data. And so those grade level content teams will come together around their shared groups of students and identify we call it soaring, gliding, or diving, which corresponds to green, yellow, and red. And on an individual level, looking at students by what we call story, strength, and need, so that we can not only be looking at their ABC data and whether or not they passed that week's assessment, but also looking at the whole student to design individual interventions, but then on a bigger level, looking at instructional design and reteach plans through patterns that those PLCs are noticing. So those are two places that we've really utilized teacher teaming in early warning systems. And I think that was my last slide.
Yes, thank you, Natalie, for sharing that information and how powerful EWS has helped with the success that your school has. And I won't brag about you, but I know that you guys have received several awards because of your great work and the work of your school and the different teams. So thank you so much for taking time to share that with us today. What I want to end with is something that should catch your attention. It's free. And I say free first before I describe, because free usually gets people's attention. It gets mine. Well, we are, as I said earlier, partnered with the Department of Education, and they have a group called the National Student Attendance Engagement and Success Center. And because of their belief in the research that has been done around early warning systems and how impactful it can be when implemented with fidelity and effectively, they are supplying a number of technical assistant visits and days by our experts at Johns Hopkins, including Paul and myself, to go out to schools and visit and provide up to 2 days of free training. And the only obligation for the school at that time is to provide a place and the people to attend. And also in that mix, at least one of the schools has to be SIG eligible. So this document here, I can send a better version of it, but I just wanted to bring to your attention that the information you share today, as well as doing individualized assessments of schools and where or how EWS could benefit you, we can go further and dig a little deeper if you would apply for the technical assistance, which again is free through the USDOE. And there's a link that you would have to click on in the document that I can send, and you would apply, and then you would get a follow-up call to discuss when and how we can have that visit happen. So I wanted to share that with you guys, because if you heard something today where you want more information or you feel like a visit could benefit your school, that you have and know about the tool that's out there through the U.S. Department of Education right now, supporting the efforts of early warning systems.
All right, we wanted to take one last moment to write down one major takeaway you have from Everyone Graduates and Aki Kurosi. So let's learn together. If you want to share your thought in the chat, that would be great. We also have a couple of questions. People are really wondering, what book is it that you were reading for your book study? Maybe they could read it too.
It's called DataWise. It's in the slide there.
DataWise, awesome. And they're hoping, I have several requests for documents that you talked about, especially that OneNote one. So we're going to try and get those posted in the archive section of our webinar page. And that would be our hope. So, and I have another question. Is this free training only open to middle and high schools?
No, it's also open to elementary schools, as we do implement EWS across all grade levels.
Awesome. And as far, Rob, you asked, is the EWS a tool or a process? Do you guys have a thought about that?
It is very much a process that that schools go through. And there are tools that can be used within that process, but for us, EWS is very much a process.
All right, and we're running out of time.
And I also wanted to say that I added the link to the application for free TA to the chat, so it's there for people to click on to get to the application.
Thank you. We do have a survey, so if you want to tell us how our webinar went, we're always looking to improve. So that is there, and that's been pasted into the chat also. If you want more on early warning systems in Washington, Sunnyside is another great example of using precision through data, and that's going to be this afternoon. And I'm sorry, the time is wrong here. It is actually 12:30 to 1:30. So, and that link is also in the chat. Next month, we're going to be talking about systematically building capacity. That's January 10th. And I know that some of our listeners, at the very beginning of our webinar, we had one reschedule of our webinar, and that messed up some calendar appointments. So this webinar is typically at 10 a.m. the second Wednesday of the month. So if you do have an Outlook calendar appointment that says a different time, feel free to change it. It might help you make it there on time. We do have Creative Commons licenses that we have used for most of our images, and we try to give credit where it's due. So if it isn't Creative Commons, then we noted that. So thank you all so much for joining us. We really appreciate hearing from our experts. What a great webinar. Thank you so much. And we'll be back next month.
Thank you, Kathy, for having us.
Mm-hmm.